It's a pleasure to be here again. It's been 2 months and a day since I was here last, and I always enjoy coming back to Bangkok. The weather is usually wonderful, a little bit warm at times, but I've got a nice pool here to cool off at the Pullman. But today you got a little bit wet, so I apologize for that. But thank you for coming, those that are here in person, and greetings to those that are on Zoom. This is very much a internal NBTC opportunity for commissioners and staff to talk freely about the recommendations. So in the United States, actually, we use the UK term, Chatham House rules, which means that what's said in this room stays in this room. It's perfectly fine for you to go outside and talk to others about all sorts of things, but don't say that Joe said this and Ken said that. We get to express our opinions, as I'm doing today, and I will express my opinions very directly and frankly without any qualifications or political correctness. I'm just going to say what I believe, and I urge you to do the same. So I view this more as an opportunity for me to convey the highlights of what we've done and to talk into some of the more recent details throughout. You can have questions, and I'm sure you will have some questions because there's many choices that are made within my recommendations. And when I say I mean our team. And I'll describe the team very quickly in a moment, but it's actually quite an accomplished group of folks that have been thinking about this with me. And this is our consensus view, and it's unanimous. There's no disagreement among the expert team. So we're going to start the morning focusing on the highlights from Progress Report 2, which was recently completed and submitted to NBTC and is being reviewed right now. And so actually many of you probably have some questions that are prompted by that report, and today is a perfect time to ask those questions. I am recording this on Zoom for the purpose of NBTC. So I will make the recording, the transcript, and a summary of the meeting available to NBTC. I will also edit the material into something for everyone and for everyone at NBTC. And I will also edit it for what I think could be a public audience, which would remove anything that's confidential and wasn't said in Progress Report 2. But since Progress Report 2 is public, anything that where I'm explaining something from Progress Report 2, it's already public, so it shouldn't be a problem. But in any event, all these materials will be reviewed by NBTC and will be approved before I put anything online. As you know, I have been very quick in putting public information online about my recommendations, and I applaud NBTC for that level of transparency. It is so impressive. My view is that transparency is the best path to prosperity. It eliminates corruption, it eliminates collusion. It is just a very powerful tool with which to bring the truth forward. And it's very important because there's always special interests that are explaining why the rules should be designed a particular way, the regulations should be like this. And why? Because when they're designed that way, the special interest makes as much money as possible. And that's true in every country around the world, including Thailand. So it's very important that, and they're going to have loud, sophisticated voices presenting their views, and they're going to use all channels of communications, both private and the media and the internet. And so it's very important, I think, to effectively dispense with things that they say that are false. And this always happens. In fact, it's sort of the number one rule of a politician is to say what's effective rather than saying what's true. So they're going to have a particular agenda, just like any special interests. And the tendency is to say what's going to be effective, given the communication channel they're using, to drive the message that they want to make, rather than conveying the truth. I am all about truth. So I speak the truth. I know you speak the truth. And the sooner the truth gets out there, the sooner the myths get pushed aside. So I applaud you. I thank you very much for having the same philosophy that I do. So that really is wonderful. So the morning, it's going to be the highlights from Progress Report 2. The afternoon, I'm going to continue on with that, focusing on TMO, the Thailand Independent Market Operator, and the details. This is actually, I think, the most important element of my recommendations. And then finally, we're going to conclude with a discussion of universal service, which also is a very important aspect of what I'm going to be recommending. Now, you might think at first glance, we hired Peter to design the spectrum auction and pick a spectrum auction format. Why is he talking about TMO and universal service? And the reason is because you asked me to design the auction, including the conditions and obligations on the winners in that auction, and to address the extremely important competition policy. And to do that, I have a very limited set of tools if I just limit myself to the typical auction format selection. So I have to reach farther into the toolkit and pull out much more powerful methods of competition, which are enabled by state-of-the-art technology that I've been working on for 20 years with lots of other folks in economics, computer science, and operations and research. And the good news is that 20-year effort is now coming to full fruition. We're at a point where we can implement what I'm talking about, and we can implement it quickly. I guarantee you the bottleneck in reform is not going to be the implementation of TMO. It's going to be the regulatory stakeholder process. So that's the plan. I actually start by saying one thing about mobile communications, which is a very important reality that's true not just in Thailand, but true globally in every single country around the world. And that is that the relative performance of the big carriers around the world has been disappointing. So the economic environment is challenging for the big carriers. They need to make lots of investment to complete their 5G rollout and to initiate their 6G rollout. That involves a lot of money. Money is not as plentiful as it was, say, in 2000 at the peak of the tech bubble, but it's very interesting to compare big tech with the big carriers. When we do a relative comparison of the stock performance of these sectors compared with the Standard & Poor's 500, we find that the big carriers in mobile have underperformed Standard & Poor's, bringing in just 63% relative to Standard & Poor's. So if you had $100 and you invested it in Standard & Poor's, you would get some number after 10 years. And if you did the same thing and you put it in big carriers, you get $63 and then appreciated up to the present. So the underperformance has been quite substantial. By contrast, and it's a sharp contrast, big tech has outperformed enormously. It's gone up 318% relative to Standard & Poor's. That is the ratio of big tech to Standard & Poor's over a 10-year period is 3.18 to 1. That's phenomenal. So good for you if you've been investing in Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and so on, Meta. Sorry if you've invested in the big carriers around the world. So that's going to be important for what we talk about because it's something that has to be considered when you're talking about the competition policy. The idea that there's going to be this third redundant network, somebody that wants to jump in and spend $15 billion building a third robust network in Thailand is zero. It's not going to happen. And one of the reasons it's not going to happen is because it's a challenging economic environment. We just aren't in the period we were before. Back in the early days of spectrum auctions, it was all about, we were starting with a monopoly utility, it was all about bringing in more competitors to compete with the monopoly phone company, which in the US was Ma Bell. And that was wonderful. And so we actually had intense competition. Everybody's fighting to be the guy that gets to compete with Ma Bell. Everyone loves to compete with a monopolist. Monopolists are sort of old and slow. And that worked out really well, but now in the US, we were down to 3. And here in Thailand, you're down to 2. That's just a reality, and we have to confront it. This, which is a very short opinion piece that Eric and I wrote. Eric's very much engaged in this project as well, and you all know Eric quite well. But anyway, this morning we wrote this. So let me just read it to you. The future mobile broadband can arrive early in Thailand. Let's hope so. Wouldn't that be wonderful? A student recently asked Professor Bolin, how will the telecom world look in 20 years? Great question. After some thinking, we have an answer for what it should look like. We are working to make that vision, articulated by Ellie Noam 30 years ago, a reality in Thailand and globally. Thailand, an important country in the region with the highest utilization of smartphones and apps, has a history of regulatory initiative and leadership. With our efforts, we believe Thailand has the potential to catch up and lead in telecom innovation. Here is our vision for Thailand's mobile industry. This future promises innovation and competition that is a win-win-win for Thais, the regulator, and the wholesale mobile operators. Everyone benefits from making the communications pie as large as possible. Everyone gets a bigger slice of the bigger pie. While status quo bias and regulatory capture often slow innovation, Thailand is equal to the task. Innovation today makes life more rewarding for regulators and the companies they regulate because competition policy will be based on core economic principles instead of arbitrary administrative parameters that stakeholders argue about endlessly. That's what I call the food fight of the stakeholder process. And it is alive and well in every country. It is actually much worse in electricity today in the United States. So you're actually fortunate that it's not quite as bad as in lots of other places. But it's something that can be avoided when you base the regulations on fundamental principles, because people can understand the fundamental principles. Competition is driven by transparent and efficient prices that are readily modeled, reducing unhedgeable regulatory risk. And that's really nice because risk is expensive. So if you have regulatory rules that put a lot of risk on the market participants, there's going to be a risk premium that they have to charge. Who pays for that? The consumers. So you want to minimize risk. Well, there's enormous uncertainty in any kinds of investments in any sector, but especially in sectors like communication that are transforming extremely quickly because it's all based on information technology and computers. So there's lots of uncertainty, and that's just part of life. So there's nothing you can do about that. But one of the biggest sources of uncertainty in all these markets is regulatory uncertainty. What will the rules of the game be in the future? That's a risk that you can reduce tremendously by adopting regulations that are based upon sound economic and scientific principles. And so that, to me, is the big thing that you want to take home, and the big reason you want to listen very seriously to what Cramton and the team are saying, because I think it is very important, and it really is a huge opportunity for Thailand. Because as you know, these technologies are enabling, and you want them enabled for the Thai people, and you're just going to feel so much better going home at night, riding the public transit or however you get around on a scooter or whatever, knowing that you've done the best job you can for the Thai people, because that's really what it's all about. Thailand's mobile telecommunications market is at a critical juncture, historically dominated by three major operators, AIS, True, and DTAC. It underwent a significant restructuring in 2022 when True and DTAC merged, resulting in a duopoly. The upcoming 5G auctions and continued spectrum planning are unlikely to attract a viable third network operator. That is an understatement. Immediate action is needed to encourage competition and the innovation it brings. A simpler way forward builds on advances in auctions and market design. And here I link to what my team is doing, providing all the resources that any regulator needs in any sector to adopt these approaches. Open access creates a new competitive market design for roaming, capacity, and spectrum access. Open access is not just a concept, but a solution that can fundamentally restructure the Thai mobile market. It offers a way to have a competitive mobile service with a duopoly or even a monopoly mobile network. Because in many parts of Thailand, perhaps a majority of the geographic land, you want to have a monopoly. It makes no sense to have two redundant networks when there's very few people. And that's going to be what we talk about at the end of today, which is universal service. So in fact, yes, you do have a duopoly, but for a lot of areas in Thailand, there's actually no service whatsoever. I'm sure you've all experienced that. In fact, probably not too far from Bangkok. And at least that's the case in the United States and Germany and every other country I visit. So by fostering increased competition among the wholesale market participants, open access removes entry barriers and paves the way for a much needed restructuring. The potential benefits, including additional infrastructure investment, increased competition, innovation, and lower rates, are not just theoretical. They are tangible contributions to Thailand's mobile industry's bright and hopeful future. Open access is built on a trading platform that organizes access and pricing among participants based on hourly auctions, which can actually increase to every minute or even every second in the future as needed, but initially every hour for communications capacity. This market is overseen by an independent market operator with a mission encoded in market rules that maximize social welfare given the preferences of the participants and the physical network constraints. It allows for spot and forward trading in communications capacity with fine granularity in time and location, paving the way for a more efficient and competitive telecom market. So the days of your call just being dropped because there's congestion, or your video going from 4K to HD to standard simply because there's congestion, are gone. Unless your preferences are such that, yes, I want to pay a low amount every month, and I will accept some occasional drop calls. I will accept reduction in video quality. So you get to express your preference preferences, and innovative service providers will give you that capability. They will provide rate plans that create enormous value for you. And what we need is these service providers to operate in a world that is understandable and a world that doesn't have entry barriers. And what I'm describing to you today has no entry barriers whatsoever and is readily understood by any sensible businessman and businesswoman because it's built on the most core principles of economics and optimization. The benefits of open access include increased transparency, fair competition, and efficient resource allocation, all of which contribute to a healthier, more dynamic mobile industry and less costly rent seeking by incumbents. That's the food fight I was referring to. While the proposed market mechanism may sound like an additional governance roadblock, it is in fact a simplification that removes the entry barriers and addresses the status quo's high market concentration. It is not a theoretical concept, but a practical solution that aligns the incentives of market participants with social welfare, making communications pie as large as possible and benefiting every stakeholder. So this is the key of market design, is you align the incentives of the participants with social welfare. Where does that idea come from? Did Cramton think of that all by his own? No, that is Adam Smith. That's the fundamental core principle of economics. If you read Adam Smith, you'll read about a baker and a consumer going to buy bread. And Adam Smith argues that in a competitive marketplace, if that baker pursues ruthlessly profit maximization, and that consumer selfishly attempts to maximize her utility, social welfare will be maximized. The greatest good will come. That's the basis for economics. And that's essentially what we're applying. And it can be applied to any market. In network markets like communications where there's congestion, a necessary and sufficient condition for economic efficiency in a competitive world is price equals marginal cost equals marginal value. And that's the implication of this Adam Smith idea. So it's extremely powerful, it's extremely important, and it actually provides a measure of how badly you're screwing up. So when I go to electricity markets that don't have a good market design, I can look at their prices and say, I see you have a potentially competitive market, but this price, is that equal to marginal cost? Is it equal to marginal value? Of course, I'm pointing to it because it's wildly different. So that suggests a very significant inefficiency. In communications, it's rather quite amazing. Congestion is not managed by price. So there's actually no attempt to achieve economic efficiency. None. It's command and control by, in the old days, the monopoly utility, Ma Bell, and in the new days, by the duopolist in providing mobile service. So, maybe they're doing some magical job in managing congestion perfectly, but we all know that's not the case. Your really important calls are being dropped, and you don't get to express that that is a really important call. And I would pay an extra 5 cents a month if that call wasn't dropped. So what I'm talking about today lets the duopolists do whatever they want, except for they have to offer 15% of their capacity on open access terms. And by that, I mean, for that 15%, no reserve price. So they're offering at a price of 0, and that fosters entry in the MVNO market until the price reaches the competitive level. And so the duopolists are paid the competitive price for that 15% of capacity. They're not forced to give it away. They're forced to offer it at a price of 0, but competition will drive that price to competitive levels. And that competition is exactly what you want. And it happens without any entry barriers whatsoever. That's the big, powerful message of the day. That's the takeaway of the day. And we can all go home now. No, we'll continue. I have much more to talk about, but I'm hitting the highlights, and the highlights are conveyed in this opinion piece that Eric and I wrote this morning. The details of open access have now been thoroughly developed and tested. An open source commercial platform linking to my website, where actually the open source code is, we have some trivial code that's posted, but the full commercial platform isn't yet posted because we're still doing extensive testing. But as soon as we've completed our extensive testing, We're doing a 12-year backcast in a large electricity market, Texas, to do this testing. So we're involving, many hundreds of thousands, actually many millions of hours over the course of 10 years. So we're really testing it in an environment that is much more complicated than the communications market anywhere in the world, and certainly the communications market in Thailand. But within a month or so, this will be free to any regulator and market participant worldwide for their customization. We're happy to help with customizing things if needed, but you can get anybody else to do the customization. It's all state-of-the-art code, programmed with state-of-the-art techniques by a talented group of PhD computer scientists, and applied math guys, and expert software engineers. So it's really, really good. And you might wonder, why is he doing this? Why is he making all this free? This doesn't sound like a very good business model. What about Adam Smith? Aren't you supposed to make money? And the answer is, we're actually not that interested in making money. We're much more interested in sharing good ideas and getting those ideas implemented. And we actually believe we can make a decent living by doing that. So that's what we're trying to accomplish. Our intellectual property is open access and open source. So there's no concerns about licensing or anything like that. There's no rabbit in the hat or whatever they say. In this market, the participants bid persistent, piecewise, linear, down-sloping demand curves, and we'll describe what that is today, for portfolios of products for communication wholesale capacity. The platform clears the market, finding unique prices and quantities that maximize social welfare. The prices and quantities are uniquely determined by the competition. These are not prices set by the regulator, uniquely determined by the competition in an understandable way. Just as simply as when I hold up supply and demand, they cross at a unique point. It's that simple. Question. Excellent questions. And please, everybody, feel free to raise your hand and ask excellent questions. You can also ask questions that aren't so excellent, but those happen to be excellent questions. So let me answer them. So first, 15%. Is that enough? And my answer is, I don't know. It's my best guess as being enough. But if I was NBTC, I would argue that it's not enough, that it needs to be 20%. So you're going to be negotiating with a duopolist. Those sorts of negotiations probably are not conducted by the staff here. They're probably at the commission level. I don't know anything about the politics, but I know a lot about negotiation. I taught negotiation for 8 years at Yale. So you want to have a starting point that's not where you want to end up, with something higher. So think of a number, 20% or maybe even 25%, something larger, and then see where you end up. And you can, of course, stick to your guns. NBTC is in a phenomenal bargaining position at this point. And so, pick a number and figure out. My point of view, the bigger the number, the better. So if you made it 30% or 40%, I would just applaud. It's like, that's amazing. That's great. You're going to have even more robust competition. That's wonderful. The reason I said 15% was because I didn't want to annihilate the duopolists. I didn't want to piss them off, basically, because I presented this publicly. And if I don't want them to hear a number, and this is common in negotiations, when you state an initial position, you don't want it to be such that the other side gets pissed off. And then it's harder to get to a win-win solution. So that's why I did the 15% number. Now, my experience, it's not just pulled out of thin air. It's based upon decades of experience with remedies like this. So I was asked by EDF, the French electricity company that is the world's expert on nuclear power, and is, at the time, they were about 95% of the French electricity market. So they were definitely a monopolist in electricity. They wanted to merge with a large German company, energy company. And the European Commission wisely said, no, you can't do that. You're already a monopolist in France, and now you want to try to monopolize Germany too? So you need to come up with some remedy to address this competition problem. And so EDF asked me if I could come up with a competition remedy. And the remedy I came up with was open access. Let's have relatively frequent auctions of the EDF's capacity, some percentage of EDF's capacity, and what that would do on a long-term basis. And the long-term basis was 10 years. The frequency at that time, because this was over 20 years ago, this is 25 years ago, 2000. So at that time, the technology, we could do these auctions once a quarter. So we did these auctions once a quarter. EDF offered, actually it was about 6% of their capacity. That's what they negotiated. I didn't make a recommendation. They negotiated with the government, with the European Commission, and settled on 6%. So I would have liked more, but that's what they settled on in that case. Now, what happened was that 6% isn't enough to overturn monopoly in any instant in time, but it was enough to create a liquid and that is a wholesale market that any market participant could reach into and buy at competitive prices. That's what it did. And in fact, it established effectively the price of energy in France was established by the auction rather than by the continuous trading market for these same products. So what would happen is, as we approached the quarterly auction, liquidity would completely dry up in the continuous market, and then all the price discovery would happen, the price formation would happen in the auction market. It works so well. And so what EDF is getting is the price in the auction. So they want that auction to work really well. They want competitors to show up to the auction and compete because they want a higher price. And they're forced to set a reserve price at zero. So the price that they get is going to be the competitive auction price. And it's the exact same thing here in Thailand that I'm proposing, except for rather than doing the auctions quarterly, we do the auctions every hour. And the reason for that is that communications is much more fluid. The dynamics are much more fluid than once a quarter. In fact, in electricity, they're much more fluid as well. And it makes no sense to do quarterly auctions. They should be hourly auctions. And that's what I've been proposing for the last year for auctions of energy products around the world. And it has been adopted in the United States for the day-ahead and the real-time market for the last 20 years. But it hasn't been adopted yet for the further forward markets that are absolutely essential for the market participants to manage risks and need. And that's ongoing. The remedy was so successful that even after the obligation ended, EDF continued to do the quarterly auctions. They loved being paid the market price for their capacity. They loved being able to identify what the competitive price was. It actually helped them, and it helped all the market participants as well. So the pie got bigger, they understood that, and they kept doing it. And so we did it for 2 years more, and then they said, Peter, we can do this on our own. We know how to do this now. And now they still do it, but they do it on their own. And so that's sort of the basis, that you don't need such a large percentage that the percentage alone is going to drive the competition. What you need is a big enough percentage to create a liquid and transparent wholesale market so that anyone, no matter how small, can enter the market and see transparent, efficient prices and make decisions based on those prices. So that actually answers both your questions. Why 15%? And hey, what about the zero price? You're not going to afford, and you actually hear people, Peter's saying that these guys have to sell stuff at a price of zero. No, they have to sell it at the competitive price. They have to offer it at zero. For example, in electricity, almost every solar and wind operator is offering their wind and solar at a price of zero. It doesn't mean they get paid zero. They get paid whatever the market price is. And so they do just fine. But they don't want to, in a competitive market, you don't want to withhold quantity by setting a price above your costs. Now, this 15%, which maybe should be 25%, I'm happy with. The bigger the number, the better. And I wouldn't lose sleep at night if you ended at 10%, but I'm much happier if you're more closer to 25%. And the reason I wouldn't lose sleep is because even 10% does the essential job of creating the efficient and transparent prices and exposing inefficiencies in the network so that all the market participants, the duopolists, and anyone that wants to introduce physical infrastructure, or anybody that wants to be a virtual operator can do so. And not only that, there's a whole group of people that want to be wholesale participants directly. They can participate in the market directly. That's absolutely wonderful. So those big tech guys that I was talking about, they're not going to go through some MVNO. There's no need to. They can participate directly in the market. Same with all the government users. So the military, all government, the city government, everybody, they can just participate directly in the wholesale market as long as they have the capability. Now, maybe cities smaller than Bangkok maybe not be interested, but any large consumer will find it attractive to bypass the middleman and just deal directly in the market. And that's not a problem. We have that in electricity. So our typical restructured electricity market in the United States has tens of thousands of market participants in the wholesale market. Tens of thousands. And that number is growing exponentially. It's not a problem. Whereas you have today, if I want to buy communications today, I can talk to duopolist A or duopolist B, and I have to negotiate a contract with them. And that's the only option I have. It's a radical transformation. And the thing is, you're not going to be getting a big fight from the duopolists. And the reason is, this is going to make them better off. They're going to be able to offer more creative plans that create more value for consumers, and they're going to be able to make more money doing so. The pie is bigger. Yes, they're going to grumble. Obviously, they would like you to create a law that said, thou shalt not have more than 2 telecommunications companies. But you're not going to pass such a law. I really think that they're going to basically just have to give up on the, let's just have a duopoly. Duopolies are wonderful. And they're going to give up pretty quickly on the unproven crap because it's not unproven. Well, actually, since caveman days, economics has been around and it's been shown to impact behavior. We have studies of pigeons understanding supply and demand and the core economic principles. Is it perfect? No. Does it work pretty well? Yes. Does it work really well in wholesale markets where the stakes are high and the participants are repeated again and again and again doing the same thing, like the pigeons? Yes, it works incredibly well. I can tell you the electricity markets that are restructured in the United States, even the smallest one, are wildly competitive. It is brutal out there. Do we have lots of people going bankrupt? No, because they can understand the economics. So they hedge. Very occasionally, there'll be such an extreme event that there'll be some market participant that's inadequately hedged and they'll go bankrupt. But of those 10,000 market participants I mentioned, it's like 1 every 10 years. Whereas if you have bad market design, as they do in Europe, you have an event like Russians invade Ukraine, driving up the gas price, and all of a sudden, a huge number of market participants go bankrupt. In Great Britain, more than half of the service providers went bankrupt in the early months of the war. What happens under those circumstances? Just like a bank crisis, the government steps in and bails out the guys and then sells their assets at distressed prices to one of the larger players. So you get more consolidation. But something you want to avoid, good market design avoids that by giving the market participants the tools with which to manage needs and risks that are flexible and responsive to circumstances as they change. That's what Thailand needs. That's what every country needs in every critical infrastructure sector. So it's not just communications that we're talking about. It's about electricity. It's about transportation. It's about water. Absolutely all these things. Gas, what have you. Anything that can be commoditized, which is basically all critical infrastructure in today's world where we can measure use at time and location where network constraints arise. So it's incredibly powerful ideas. And the good things, so maybe you've got some friends in I'm talking to the electricity sector on Thursday. Maybe you've got some friends there. Maybe you've got some friends at the Bank of Thailand. Tell them what you're doing. They're going to be like, wow, that is impressive. You guys are ahead of the curve. We got to do that too. And they'll tell you they are trying to do that. But they have to overcome political constraints just like you do. So anyway, I'm speaking frankly, and I hope you don't mind. Implementing such a model for Thailand will achieve the government's objectives, enabling competition, lower rates, investment incentives, administrative predictability, and simplicity. The market aligns the incentives of market participants with social welfare, making the communications pie as large as possible. Every stakeholder benefits. Open access allows infrastructure sharing without reducing competition in Thailand's wireless market. It also allows for efficiency gains while maintaining robust competition. With each mobile generation, economies of scale are increasingly necessary to facilitate artificial intelligence and other real-time information and control demands. So the investment needs of the carriers are ever growing. The economics are getting worse and worse. You got to address this. And the natural thing is the duopolists will come to you and say, hey, we're doing really bad. We need a lot of money. If you gave us a $5 billion subsidy, we would be able to do X. That's what, and monopolists do the same thing, right? Duopoly is no better than monopoly. In fact, it can be worse because they can discipline each other to act like even better monopolists. You want to avoid that. And that's just nonsense. Just tell them no, we believe in competitive markets, go away. An open access foundation is increasingly important because the digital ecosystem's value generation has shifted significantly over the last few years. The digital economy has become pyramidic, regarding value generation with big tech at the top globally, as seen from the chart which I showed you before. The emerging problem is that the base will become increasingly porous because of a lack of investment in upgrades and maintenance. The upper layers are dependent on the lower levels in the value hierarchy. A shift to open access will make Thailand's telecom more future-proof, resilient, competitive, and market-driven. Thailand will have a foundation for innovation that will be the envy of the world until others see the secret of its success. The future is bright, and Thailand has the potential to lead the way in telecommunication innovation. Let Thailand leapfrog countries slowed by regulatory barriers. So that's it. Our hope is that you will encourage Eric and I to submit it to a Thailand newspaper. I think that it's a very good message and one that will help you in your negotiations with the carriers. But anyway, we're certainly welcoming any suggestions you have in improving it. We wrote it this morning, so you can imagine that it may be a little bit rough in spots. I wanted to emphasize the leapfrog because there's countries that I've been a professor in Germany for 5 years at the University of Cologne, and then also I'm at the Max Planck Institute in Bonn. And I talk to the German regulators and market participants regularly about these issues in electricity and communications. I can tell you they all agree with me. I can also tell you that they never listen to me. That is, they never change. It's unbelievable. Look at their spectrum auction rules. They're from the rules in 1993 in the United States. They adopted those rules and they have not changed them. They have all sorts of problems that we gradually addressed in our pursuit towards better auction design. So it's really amazing. And now when I go to Africa, I was just in Africa, various countries. So I'm talking to the folks in Tanzania and I say, look, you can leapfrog Germany. You know, what they're doing in electricity and communications is pathetic. In electricity, it is absolutely unbelievable. They have a policy of net zero by a particular day, that is, no carbon emissions whatsoever by like 2050. And they've got a policy with respect to price that the consumers get the exact same price 24/7 every hour of the year. So no, they do not have real-time meters. They can't even measure use. There's no ability to charge different prices. They can't even do time of use pricing because they can't measure use by time. It's primitive. I mean, it is really like pre-electricity practically. It's unbelievable. And I go and I talk to them for hours. You can go to my website and see me talk to the Development Bank of Germany. And I've gone to the Bank of Germany and talked to them and the same thing about these innovations. And they all listen, they agree, Peter, you're right. We absolutely agree with you, you're 100% right. And then they don't change anything. I'm urging Tanzania to leapfrog. I'm urging Thailand to leapfrog, and it's not that hard. I mean, you're already light years ahead of them on your telecommunications policy. Just step forward on electricity and step forward here more. Because you know how enabling these technologies are, how important they are to drive the economy. You've seen what happened in Cambodia. Cambodia under Pol Pot, it was just horror, absolute horror, complete destruction. And it didn't end until a little bit more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago or so. In those 25 years, Cambodia has made unbelievable progress. And how did they do that? They did it by implementing sensible policy. So sensible policy is the way forward. And I just see it everywhere. That's one of the beauties of telecommunications and other sectors that are driven by information technology and computers. You can leverage this. These countries in Africa and in Asia are not disadvantaged at all when it comes to 5G, 6G, and whatever. In Africa, they have 10% penetration of telephone lines. When we look at that in the old days, only 10% of the population has phones. Well, today, who cares? Those phones aren't used for anything. I don't know, what do they do? I go to hotel rooms and the phones don't even work anymore, and nobody cares. So pretty much every hotel I go to, the phone doesn't work. I don't know if you've ever tried using a phone in a hotel, but it's amazing. It's totally dead technology. So whereas mobile, 85% of Africans have mobile. The future is now. It has arrived. We just need to improve the policies a teeny bit, by adopting super sensible ideas, and everything will be wonderful. Okay, we made it through slide 3. I only have, I don't know, 77 slides, but actually I've got 137 slides, and we've already done slide 3. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. But that highlight, I think, does pretty much capture the entire message. So that's why I wanted to really emphasize it. And now I'm going to skip through some of the details. But at this point, you should definitely raise a hand with questions. You know, as we finish this first session, feel free to raise your hand or scream out, because there will be, I'll be going too fast for anybody to understand if this is the first time they've seen it. But hopefully you have seen it. And as I said, you can always go to the slide out to put in a question. So this is the plan for the immediate moment. And then this is going to be the end of the morning and in the afternoon. And so let's start out. That's me, you know me. This is my team. Actually, I have to update this because there's like 3 new people that I have to add. And I didn't have time to add them. They were brought onto the team just this week or last week. So I will update this. It's really a phenomenal group. We are all deeply committed to bringing this future to Thailand and to any other country that is willing to adopt good ideas. It's our view that the good ideas are going to spread globally. And you might ask, well, you know, why should we do it? If it's going to spread globally, then how do we get an advantage? And the answer is, well, if you don't do it, you'll get destroyed. That's why you need to do it. So, and we are going to break soon, like in 15 minutes or 10 minutes, because I know everybody has to have a little bit of personal time, discussion time. So there's the work plan. We're nearing the end, finalizing we're teams actively engaged in finishing the final report. We will submit that on schedule. Whenever the due date is, we will submit it on schedule and it'll be reviewed. Then we will be done. But our work will not be done. We are certainly going to continue with enthusiasm working with NBTC in other subsequent projects that are already being worked out with Eric and with an MOU with top US university. All that's being worked out as we speak. So you know what the Thailand setting is. You've got mobile, you've got spectrum, you need to allocate it to the carriers. Here's the current allocation, and we want to move from the past to the future. The thing I want to emphasize here is the future is, you know, incredibly exciting. That this competition from open access opens up so many doors that I can't even tell you what the sexiest innovation is going to be that really turns out to be the game changer to bring value to Thai citizens. That's what innovation does. If you know anybody with a really fantastic idea, they get rewarded as long as the entry barriers aren't there. This competition for ideas is going to be very impressive and effective. We're going to have efficient sharing and trading of capacity and efficient sharing and trading of spectrum. So, you know, today we're talking about the spectrum auction that you're going to hold in the next couple of months. But in the future, you can imagine a spectrum world where, in fact, you're conducting spectrum auctions every hour of every day for all the spectrum bands that you have. That may sound like a crazy idea, but it is trivial. It's just using the exact same technology that we're going to talk about today. So it's amazing. And in fact, it was that vision that Ellie Noam articulated 30 years ago. That in fact, these big event spectrum auctions, they're the greatest thing since sliced bread today, and they got adopted worldwide. They started in the United States, and then boom, they went everywhere. I say boom, it took 10 years, but you know, eventually they went everywhere, even to France, even to Germany. You know, that took 7 years, 8 years. I'm going to just conclude this session with the objectives and scope of the study, which is, you know, it's a market design project. You know, I love efficiency, fairness, transparency, and simplicity. I know you love that too. So we'll come back, talk quickly about the auction formats, talk about the state of the art, but quite frankly, the state of the art spectrum auction today for today's setting is very simple. All we've done is taken what we did in the past and simplify it to make it simpler and more powerful and avoid all the little problems they had in the past. So we'll be able to do that very quickly. And then we'll be able to talk about what's going on in other countries. And then we'll jump right into TMO and universal service. Okay, so that's the plan. So welcome to the second session. And I'm going to go back to slide 3, and then we'll jump back to where we were before. And the reason I'm going back to slide 3 is there was a very good question that came up at break. And that is, why? Why does big tech outperform the big carriers by so much? Is it a sign, as the carriers will likely tell you, that they need to be subsidized in some way by the government, that in fact, the spectrum auctions The prices need to be much lower, that is the source of the problem. And the answer is no, that has absolutely nothing to do with the plight of the big carriers. The plight of the big carriers comes from, again, fundamental economics. It does not come from different rules in different places, and just on average, the rules that the big carriers face are more attractive from the regulators than the rules the big carriers face. That's not what's going on. It's fundamental economics. So what's the difference? Think of the economics of the big carriers. Actually, let's start. Think of the economics of the big tech. Okay, what does big tech do? They take information technology, they produce products that have a marginal cost of zero, and they sell them to as many people as possible. Often, a lot of the products that they create, they sell at a price of zero because their costs aren't zero, they're substantially negative because they get value from the eyeballs, because then they can sell advertising. So when we look at the economics of the big tech, it has all to do with their ability to grow customers and create services that the customers value. So if you're a big tech company like Google, the number of potential customers you have is the number of people in the world as time goes on. So many billions of people. Their current customer base is not many billions of people. Maybe it's 2 billion or 1 billion. I don't know how many customers they have, but there's substantial room to grow. Their market penetration is not 100%. And there's an infinite array of valuable services that they could offer to consumers, all at a marginal cost of zero. So that's why big tech is the value of a stock, of course, is the sum of the future cash flows, the future costs and benefits. It has nothing to do with historical costs and benefits. It's always forward-looking. So the value of a big tech company is essentially the value of the growth, the number of customers. And I can tell you virtually every model is an exponential model. How quickly do the number of customers grow exponentially? And the value that they create for the consumers and their share that they can extract from consumers. And for a lot of the big tech companies, a lot of the revenues are coming now from ad revenue. And on average, Google's take rate is 40%. So when the publishers pay $100 to Google for an ad placement, an impression, Google passes $60 to the publisher, the New York Times or whatever, and keeps $40 for themselves. Now, how can they support such a high take rate? Well, that's actually something I'm expert in. I'm the auction expert for the publishers. And I just finished this morning a draft of my testimony to my rebuttal of Paul Milgram's testimony. He's the auction expert for Google. And I explain all the bad things that Google does to increase their take rate, prevent entry, all sorts of things. And all of these things are public information. So you can just Google Cramton take rate or Google just take rate various industries in big tech, and ask perplexity.ai or your favorite AI program. What are some of the bad things that Google does to increase the take rate for the benefit of Google and at the expense of consumers? And it'll give you, it actually might point you to a podcast that I did on the subject. So it's public information. I don't think I'm giving away secrets here. I'm not. So anyway, that comes from the monopolization, some amount of monopolization of big tech companies. And as you know, there's the network economics are such that it's pretty easy for one guy to capture a huge market share and then leverage their huge market share to perform better in the long run. And that is exactly what's happening with these big tech companies. Now, the world's getting a little bit interesting because AI fundamentally changes the economics. All of a sudden, there's a marginal cost, a significant marginal cost to answer your AI queries. So what's happened in the pricing, and you've all seen this, is now if you want to do the fancy AI and you want quick results, you need to pay a premium price. Usually it's $20 a month in the United States. I don't know what it is in Thailand. Some services are $10 a month, but most are $20 a month and some are even more. So the economics is fundamentally changing. And you can see that the stock market had a little bit of a reaction when China demonstrated that Google and the others didn't have such a huge advantage in AI, that China couldn't produce an AI that actually performs pretty well. So, as soon as that was discovered, of course, the bubble burst and the NVIDIA stock tumbled by a huge percentage. So the reason for the bubble is because people are stupid. Look around you. There's not in this room, of course, but once you get out in public, there's just people do lots of stupid things. I do lots of stupid things. We all do stupid things, and one of them is buy NVIDIA stock or GameStock or whatever stock when other people are buying it because other people are buying it, not because it has value. And so the price goes up, and the price can go arbitrarily high as long as you think there's going to be bigger fools that are willing to pay even more. So this is a little bit of a digression, but I want to explain, what's happening in big tech has nothing to do with the governments going soft. I mean, to some extent, it does have to do with the governments being soft on their competition policy. So they've given big tech enormous reign. And I think one of the reasons they get enormous reign is because they do provide unbelievably good services for consumers as well. So, Google Maps and Chrome and all these Google services are absolutely wonderful. I use them all the time, every single day. So I don't mean to bash Google, but they do have this other side, which is their revenue side. And their revenue side is interested in making money. And they hire not an incredible set of talented engineers, but they hire an incredible set of talented MBAs and lawyers. And those guys are interested in revenue manufacture. And so they manufacture revenues. And the way they do it is all the clever ways that we do these things in the United States, some of which need to be enforced by the regulatory agencies, in particular, the DOJ and the FTC. And that's happened in the United States. That's happening in the United States. It's happening in Europe. I suspect it's happening in Thailand as well, where there's a little bit of a pushback. So, these guys are going to get beaten back a little bit. Now, that's the economics of the carriers, why it's been so rosy, because they can essentially credibly say that they're going to have exponential growth in customers and they have zero marginal cost, which means their stock price has to grow exponentially, which means it's potentially a very good value. Big carriers, what's their situation? Let's think of their economics. Let's think about customer growth. That's the key, right? Customer growth. Well, what's the penetration in Thailand? It's 100%. Can it go higher than 100%? No, it can't go higher than 100%. I mean, you can, because I have, I'm 300% myself, because I've got all these accounts, let's say. But effectively, they've got all the customers already. Customers cannot grow. The only thing that can grow is the value of the services that they're offering. But customers have repeatedly said in the United States that they are only willing to pay $50 a month for mobile. And you probably have some number here in Thailand that on average, folks are willing to pay, I don't know what it is, $40 a month for mobile. Maybe they're willing to pay $60 a month. I don't know whether it's higher or lower than in the US. I know everything is wonderfully inexpensive here compared to the US, so maybe mobile is too. But the bottom line is they can't increase revenues. They can't increase price. They can't increase quantity. Profits is price times quantity. And so they're stagnant. And yet is their cost zero? No, they've got significant continual investment costs bringing on the new technologies. So that's why the carrier's economics is bleak everywhere around the world, including Thailand. And the big tech is so positive, at least for right now. And with AI, I don't know. I mean, I definitely thought it was a bubble. I don't sell stuff short, but I definitely thought it was a NVIDIA bubble earlier. And it turns out it was. But I didn't act on it because I just don't do that. I don't trade individual stocks. So now we understand the why. And so when the carriers come to you and say, we need money, we're hurting. Peter's got a chart that shows you how badly we're hurting. We need money. Say, get lost. You don't need money. You need just people and you just have bad economics, and there's nothing we can do about that. Absolutely nothing to do. The best we can do for you and the Thai people is to bring you a competitive market. And then you can hire good engineers and economists and develop valuable services for consumers at the least cost. And then you will win and prosper, and you will dominate. You will push aside the weaker guys that can't. Look at what happened in the United States. In the United States, we had two dominant carriers, AT&T and Verizon. But we had these little upstarts, Sprint, T-Mobile. And what happened? T-Mobile rolls in on a motorcycle with long hair and screams out, we are going to kick your butt, Verizon and T-Mobile. I'm sorry, Verizon and AT&T. You are dumb and dumber, and we're going to kick your butt. And then they kicked Verizon's and AT&T's butt for 15 years. Look at the stock price of T-Mobile relative to, I mean, the only carrier that's positive on this list that did better than Standard & Poor's. I mean, there's several, but the only one in the United States is T-Mobile. And AT&T and Verizon have been a disaster the last 10 years. So how did they do it? T-Mobile just had a great service and great marketing. When I walked into the T-Mobile store about 20 years ago, I thought I was 10 years younger. It was just so refreshing to see, oh, they've got wonderful products. It's got pretty pictures, nice color. It was wonderful. That's what competition does. It drives out the monopolists. There is no monopoly in the world that can do well against the upstarts, because there's too many upstarts, too many creative ideas. And every monopoly is loaded with lots of fat and lots of bureaucracy that makes it difficult to do anything. So that's why the T-Mobile CEO was so right. He's no longer the CEO now, but he did his job. He kicked their butt. They are gone. And it was so wonderful because he actually had these ads. I'm sure you probably saw some of them with him on his motorbike, and he called them Dumb and Dumber for 10 years. I still call them Dumb and Dumber. And even though AT&T provides my fiber service, T-Mobile provides my mobile service. Okay, that was a little bit of a digression. I apologize, but it's a very good example of the power of competition and what it brings, and also why you should not listen to crazy arguments like send me more money. You send them more money, that's just a wealth transfer to the shareholders. It doesn't help anybody at all except for those shareholders. So it's just a cash payment, fee for lobbying or whatever, which you don't want to do. Okay, auction formats. We've got this history that we've gone through before, so I'll just go very quickly. 1993, the simultaneous multiple round auction is developed and implemented by the FCC for its first spectrum auction in 1994. Countries around the world see how effective it is and see the arguments in favor of auctions. Every country in the world adopts auctions eventually, but that process took about 12 years. Almost every country adopted the simultaneous multiple round auction. Some countries were slower to adopt, such as France, and some countries like Germany, when they adopted, never did any improvements, ever, ever, ever. They actually, when I talked to them last, just a few months ago, they said that their priority number one was modernizing their spectrum auctions. So we'll see. So gradually, we realized that the simultaneous clock auction was a simpler, more effective variation of the simultaneous multiple round auction based on the exact same principles and ideas, just getting rid of some of the unnecessary features of the simultaneous multiple round auction that led to unnecessary gaming. Then some folks that were slow to want to make the full transition to a simultaneous clock auction adopted the simultaneous multiple round clock hybrid auction, which is effectively has some of the features of a clock auction and some of the features of a simultaneous multiple round auction, and has therefore some of the problems of the simultaneous multiple round auction. And so these countries, Australia, the Netherlands, a few others, adopted them briefly, but then switched to the simultaneous clock auction. So now everybody, to my best knowledge, is using the simultaneous clock auction. The only change to this is there's a fancy version of the simultaneous clock auction, which is a package auction. And for that, the bidders are able to express their preferences for combinations of licenses. So you can express complementarities when you're buying left and right shoes. That's very nice because you want a pair of shoes. So you'd actually prefer to bid on pairs of shoes rather than left and right shoes, because you might rent 2 left shoes and no right shoes, and that wouldn't work very well for you. So that's what the combinatorial clock auction is all about. So we used that for a while when we needed it, but today we don't need it, because today the spectrum is very much incremental spectrum. It's much more of a commodity, and there's no reason that the complementaries that are there can't be managed by the participants. We have a much simpler simultaneous clock auction. So now everybody switched back to the simultaneous clock auction. The combinatorial clock auction was not a bad idea that got rejected. It was a good idea for the time, because at the time it was adopted, we didn't know whether people wanted paired spectrum or unpaired spectrum. There was a huge debate, people arguing both ways. And the combinatorial clock auction was the only auction design that enabled the band plan to be established by the auction, the quantity of paired versus the quantity of unpaired. So that's why it was introduced by the UK way back in 2004. I was hired by the UK to develop the combinatorial clock auction. And so I think they implemented it first in 2007, and then it was adopted by virtually all the countries in Europe and by Australia and Canada and other places. But now it's not used anymore. In fact, it's used, but it's not used for spectrum auctions. It's used for other sorts of auctions. Okay, so that's the full history. I've given you the summary. I think you know how they work. The advantages of the simultaneous multi-round auction is the wonderful price discovery. The disadvantages are the gaming that can occur if all the parameters aren't set just right. So that is the quick summary. The simultaneous clock auction further simplifies the auction, enabling richer price discovery and at the same time eliminating a lot of the gaming. So that's really nice. So this was a big advance, and I think I started arguing for it in 2000 with Paul Milgram and Larry Isabel, and it took us 5 or 6 years, but maybe more than that. I don't know when the FCC started implementing it, but I think it was like 2009. But we were arguing for it in 2000, and eventually they acquiesced and adopted the clock auction. Now all the governments are using the clock auctions, with the one exception of Germany. I think Germany is the only holdout that hasn't changed. But even Germany now has a top priority to figure out how a clock auction works. I said the benefits, and the gaming that we're avoiding is all this nonsense about putting in bids where the trailing digits signal information to the parties and all things like that, which is not necessary. The other thing the clock auction does is it speeds the process enormously relative. It's about 4 times faster than an SMRA in the same situation. That lowers participation costs for both the regulator and for all the market participants. So you get better price discovery, you get it much faster, and it's much simpler. So that's why we do it. And the hybrid I'm not going to talk about at all because it's completely dominated. It never should have existed, but somebody had the bright idea to implement it. Wasn't me. Combinatorial clock, I've already talked about. We're no longer selling pairs of shoes. We're selling, actually, when we do have pairs of shoes, we sell pairs of shoes. We don't offer left and right shoes. That is when the complementarities are common and known, you auction, the products are defined as the packages that everybody wants to buy. So we do that. That's what the packaging is all about when we're doing our product design as part of the auction design. Very important part of the auction design. But we aren't in a situation where we need to have the auction do that stuff. Any questions about the basic formats? And then I'll talk about the experience, and then we'll jump into the competition policy. Everyone's happy. Good, I thought so, because you've seen this before. So the insights from other countries, lots of great experience. In the paper, I just talk about 6 countries, but my experience is more like 50 countries. So I don't know all the details of the 50 countries, but it's certainly informed by my impressions of the mistakes folks have made and the good things folks have done. And then from all this, I try to establish best practice. So that's what I've done here. I picked out 6 countries, 5 in addition to Thailand. And the 5 I picked out sort of span the spectrum in terms of, they're all relevant to Thailand. Most of them are similar in size to Thailand. They're all developed countries that with solid economies like Thailand. And but some are larger, like Australia and United States geographically, and of course, United States population-wise as well. But otherwise, it's sort of a similar set, and they're doing different things. And so it was sort of a rich variety with which to discuss. Everything I said before has happened in these 6 countries. So we've had, start with the SMRA, we moved the clock, and so on. The timing has been different in different places. Germany is only slowly seeing the light of day, but everybody else has moved right along. And some of them I'm intimately familiar with: Thailand, Netherlands, United Kingdom, United States, Australia, and Germany, because that's another reason. So I know all the details of these countries. And because I've worked with their governments for many, many years, I've worked with market participants for many, many years in these places. So I really know all the details for these 6. The other 44, I know somewhat well, but not perfectly. Like Colombia, I know pretty well because I often go to Colombia, but I'm going to Colombia for electricity, not for communications. So, but anyway, I learned about their spectrum while I'm there. And then just this is just, I know I'm going too fast for you to digest all this, but this is my favorite picture, which really shows how the price discovery is interrupted by the activity rule transitions in the SMRA, whereas a clock auction doesn't have any of these silly interruptions. And so, because this is the United States, all their clock auctions and their SMRA auctions, and you can see that all the clock auctions, there's this nice monotonicity, which is sort of the steady price discovery through the auction process. It's also much faster. You can think of the height of this as the amount of price formation that's happening at an instant in time. By 50 rounds, basically everything worth knowing has been known in the clock auction, whereas this might take hundreds of rounds in the simultaneous multiple round auction. That's the evolution that I've been talking about. Now, the auction format is one piece of the puzzle. Absolutely, that's my main message. So don't go out saying, oh, we learned about auction formats. You learned much more than auction formats. You learned about auction design and competition policy for the entire sector. Yes, question. Sure. So what this is showing the excess demand of aggregate demand. So when you're looking at an auction, essentially all these auctions, all these dynamic auctions, like the simultaneous multiple round auction, the clock auction, and so on, they're all driven by excess demand. When there's no excess demand, the auction's over. The auction continues until there's no excess demand. So basically, auction end is zero excess demand, typically, except for not in the SMRA. Why is that? Because the SMRA, what they do is because of its limitations, they start with a loose activity rule. The activity rule is the requirement that the bidders have to satisfy in order to maintain eligibility. So in the very first FCC spectrum auction, the activity rule was, I think it was started at 33%. You had to bid on 33% of what you ultimately wanted to win. And then that was stage one. And then stage two was 2/3. Now everybody has to, everybody's hoping that we're bidding in stage one and we're coming to a point where there's no excess demand. So now everybody's hoping, boy, I hope those other guys are happy because that is, they don't expand their demand because I'm going to expand my demand a lot because I have to. So they're just illustrating the very natural snake in the grass strategy that you would implement on eBay if you're bidding in a second price auction. If you're an experienced eBay bidder, even though you can put in a proxy bid for your full reservation price, and then it will just keep raising it until the last moment. And then if you're bigger than everybody else, you'll win, otherwise you lose. So pretty much everybody, I suspect, knows that that's a bad strategy. It's a bad strategy because you're stimulating demand through your aggressive bidding early on. And what you want to do is hide as a snake in the grass. And there's literally thousands of apps that will place your bid at the last second. That bid sniping is a real thing. There's academic papers by Nobel laureates. Al Roth and Axel Ockenfels wrote a very nice paper 25 years ago on bid sniping in eBay. It's a very real thing, and it's caused by a flaw in their auction design, eBay's auction design. And that flaw is the hard stop, the hard ending. Whereas the Amazon auctions avoided that flaw. You probably don't remember, but the auction didn't end at 10 a.m. on Saturday. It ended on 10 a.m. on Saturday if no one submits a bid within a window, which was like 5 minutes, but otherwise it would go another 5 minutes. So the deadline would extend. So that soft closing is an innovation that Amazon introduced. The reality is mostly they don't want auctions for if you're buying a book or a shoe or a pair of shoes, you just want to buy it and be done with it. So Amazon quickly realized that. They dropped their auctions. They may do auctions still, but it's 0% of their market share. And eBay, same thing. They still do auctions. Auctions is still probably 10% of Amazon's business, of eBay's business, but they're much less important. And the big innovation for eBay was not switching out of the hard close. It was introducing the buy it now. That was the big innovation. And then they found everybody wants to buy it now. So that's what people do. But of course, in a wholesale market, the market participants are much more sophisticated. They're willing to participate in a sophisticated way, and it makes sense. If you're buying a book or an umbrella, you don't want to spend 10 hours developing your auction strategy. You want to do it quickly. These companies are spending multiple years developing an auction strategy for your auction. Multiple years. I don't think Pat and I do this all the time with bidders. We're never called by somebody and saying, there's an auction in 3 months, can you help us? No, it's 2 years ahead that they call us. There was only one, and they're always startups. So a startup will call, we have an auction in 90 days, can you help us? And we do, we help them, and they do well. It's not a problem. We can do our part in 90 days. But all the work that the carriers do, it's a multiple year experience. And that's true worldwide. So I'm sure your guys are doing it. Obviously, I'm not doing it with them, but your guys are doing it. And they know that, well, we don't have the rules. That's not a problem for them. They know they can handle that. They can adjust. That's what businesses do. They adjust to current circumstances. The weather changes, they adapt. Competition policy. That's a nice picture of Paul Milgram. So Paul Milgram is the auction expert for Google. As I said, I've been up against Paul in the past, and Bob Wilson is advised me. And so Bob Wilson is Pat's grandfather in the academic sense, because Pat's my PhD student. So that's really neat. So it's a very close community of auction experts around the world. We engage with each other. So goals of a consistent family, that's what you're doing. And there's your spectrum. We all know that. packaging is one of the things that we're going to want to talk about. I love to package things in terms of low, mid, and high band. I also love to package things in terms of paired and unpaired. And then also sometimes in huge countries, I like to package things in terms of major urban centers, non-major urban centers. So that's how I do the packaging. There's all those combinations. It's basically 2 by 2 by 2. So there's like 8 possibilities. That's a really nice, simple way to do it. It's very effective. It's relevant in terms of different economics. The idea is you want as few products as reasonable to capture for simplicity, but you don't have to worry about if you've got 8 versus 6 or 16 versus 8. It doesn't really make any difference. And as I said before, in electricity, we do auctions with tens of thousands of products. It's not a problem. Simultaneous clock, and the flow trading approach that I'll describe when I describe TIMO. You know the setting probably better than I do. And I think you know my position on these things, the on-site versus online. I recommend online. On-site has no advantages, but it is not a problem. So you can do an on-site auction. It's just fine. So it's politically difficult to switch to online. No big deal. So I want to be very clear about, sometimes I'm going to recommend things, and they're things that I'm going to stick to at the end because they're super important. You can't change it. If you do it, it's a fatal flaw. There's other things where I have a preference, but it really doesn't matter that much. This is one of those things. It really doesn't matter that much. Everybody is here in Bangkok. It's not that hard for them to get here. They can come to NBTC and live there, and that's fine. And if you guys are happy to run a hotel for a little bit, it's no problem. It's no big deal. So that works. The anti-collusion rule is one way you can make the auction work better. This rule applies to both on-site and online. You want to have a rule like this. It's very effective. This is one of these things that's a no-brainer. You definitely have a rule like this. Because collusion, it's a problem everywhere. It's a problem in the United States. It's a problem in Peru. It's a problem in Thailand. Everywhere in the world. The guys are going to want to try to collude. And if you give them methods, then they will do it. It's all part of Adam Smith's, trying to make as much money as you can. So it's natural. You shouldn't, get upset with them for trying to do things that are in their interest. You just need to align their incentives. So you make it illegal. It's like, yeah, you can go ahead and collude. That's fine. But you go to jail and you'll be fined. But go ahead, go for it. Spectrum packaging. This is something, again, where this is my initial view after thinking about it for a few months, after talking with you, but not talking with the carriers. I haven't talked at all, not 1 minute with the carriers, unless at the public thing, they came up to me and said hello. And some of them did. They came because they gave me their cards. But that was it. That's my only interaction with the carriers. And that's perfectly fine because I actually pretty much know what they're going to say on most things. But the one thing where I would like their input is on technological matters. They know the technology much better than I do. I do want to hear about that. So when they express views about technology and say that, it's like our software engineers or hardware engineers say that we need to do it this way in order to conform with the global standards and that will improve efficiency, then that's kind of communication you should send to me, and you should listen to it, I should listen to it, and we should make adjustments. So with respect to packaging, that's essentially what I want to hear. I want to hear technological reasons or economic reasons for alternative packaging approaches. I am all ears, I welcome it, and so we can make any kind of recommendation. Bottom line is we can make more products and it's not a big deal. Sometimes when we make the products and we tie them to the activity rule in particular ways, it can create gaming opportunities. So that's what I want to avoid. So I want to avoid the gaming, but I'm all for packaging that works. What the carriers are going to argue for is as much flexibility as possible. So they're going to want to basically do whatever they want whenever they want it. Like the anti-collusion rule. They don't want the anti-collusion rule. You don't need that. We're well behaved. You know that. You trust us. You should ignore that. Let's see. With respect to the activity rule, they're going to say, oh, the activity rule, you don't even need an activity rule. We'll behave well. Trust us. But in fact, you have to have an activity rule. We know you have to have an activity rule. Otherwise, if you don't have an activity rule, people will bid snipe. They'll wait until the last second. Revealing information in the auction early is a disadvantage. You only do it if you're forced to. We know that from the eBay auctions. We know that from before the eBay auctions. It was something that the Babylonians understood. This is really basic stuff. So that's the activity rule is there for good reason. And we've learned a lot about the parking strategies. So Pat and I would work with bidders to maximize the parking strategy opportunities to make a little bit more money for our bidder. And that's part of it. The guys are following the rules of the game. If you're playing by the rules, the only thing you should ask them is you got to play by the rules. If you don't play by the rules, you're going to go to jail or be fined, or both. But if you play by the rules, whatever, go for it. That's my view. That's your job as the regulator to make the rules that are aligned with the social interests. Sequencing versus simultaneous. My preference is simultaneous. Do one auction event. If it's on site, bring the guys to hotel NBTC and have them do the simultaneous clock auction. That's going to minimize your cost. It's going to minimize their cost. It's going to maximize the price discovery. So it's better for everybody. If you do it in sequence, it's not a big deal. It will work fine in sequence. So this is one of those things that I'm fine either way. I prefer simultaneous, and I have good reasons for preferring simultaneous, but it doesn't make that much difference. So if there's strong political will to do it sequentially, if somebody's asking for sequential and they're putting a lot of pressure on the politicians to push for sequential, do it sequential. It's not worth the fight. If they have no good reason, then just tell them, look, there's good reasons to do it simultaneously. Isn't it okay? Can we do it simultaneously? And hopefully they'll say yes. If not, fine. Product groups, already talked about. This is my straw man, but it is a straw man and certainly open for technological. And this is where you want to engage the NBTC engineers and economists, to several of whom are in this room, to talk with the engineers and economists at the carriers and find out what their argument is, and then use perplexity.ai or whatever your favorite tool is to find out if what they're saying is true, because they might have been influenced by the lobbyists within their organization to tell you a bunch of stuff that's not really true. I don't know. But anyway, the AI searches will give you a good sense if you give it the right queries, and our team certainly can do this as well. We're quite good at doing these queries to sort of find out exactly what the global standard is, what the prospects for the standards are going forward, what limitations those impose on spectrum groupings, and what spectrum groupings they enable. That's all fine. We can do that. Again, open for discussion, any possibility. Now, the one thing, the big issue here is the activity rule. What I've proposed is effectively three independent simultaneous clock auctions that are conducted simultaneously. That means that when I say independent, I mean that each of these product groups has its own activity rule, which is, in a clock auction, your demand can stay the same or decrease. It can never increase. So a very simple activity rule. But at the other extreme, we could have one simultaneous clock auction that integrated all the products, which means we have to have an activity rule that covers all the products. So the way we do that, and this is often done, is we weight each product by its relative value. So it's relative, and give it eligibility points based upon its relative value. Yes, it is possible. Is it desirable? Okay, so this is exactly, good question. It's exactly the question that I want to answer right now. And the answer is, it is desirable if there's sort of equal substitution possibilities across all the products. That's what doing one simultaneous ascending auction and having an aggregate activity rule for all the products does. And I said the aggregation is done with these eligibility points that reflect the relative value, which is done based on the reserve price. So it makes the reserve price much more important, and that the reserve price can impact the auction outcomes, not through setting a floor on the price, but through the activity rule and how price formation takes place. So if you, NBTC, have perfect information about the relative values of spectrum, then this is not a problem at all. It works perfectly. Use your perfect information to implement optimal reserve prices. If you don't have perfect information, then the players are going to gain wherever you made a mistake. So if you've set a reserve price too low for one product and too high for another, what the bidders are going to do is concentrate all their bidding on the one where you're too low. So you will have huge excess demand for this stuff that nobody wants, and you'll have inadequate demand for for the stuff that everybody really wants. That's the problem. That's the parking strategy that the bidders have learned to exploit over 20 years of practice. So we have whole subroutines that go through and optimize parking strategies based upon relative prices and mistakes that regulators make. And so the bidders can implement their parking strategies quite effectively at this point. They're quite sophisticated. But the problem is it harms price formation. If it's the case that it is safe to segregate a particular product into its own independent simultaneous clock auction, one or more products, then that's desirable, because then you don't have to worry about parking strategies. There's no way you can park your high band unpaired eligibility with mid or low band if it's a separate independent auction. Now, the high band unpaired is an obvious case. High band unpaired is not a good substitute for either mid band or low band, whether it be unpaired or paired. The substitution possibility there is extremely weak. So absolutely no question, you want the high band unpaired in a separate category. So it's going to be its own independent thing that happens simultaneously with the other auctions. And that's going to be the last word I want to say about the high band unpaired, because economically it is irrelevant to this auction. It is one lot of one high band, which is much lower value than the low and mid band spectrum. So I won't say any more words about high band again to save time. I've said everything that needs to be said. So now we're limited to low and mid band paired and mid band unpaired as my two straw man categories. I organized it like that because in some sense, it seems natural to think of the unpaired as being, low and mid band are pretty close to each other. Mid band is better at capacity, low band is better at coverage, but they're pretty close to each other. So you need both, because you need to provide a service, you have to have both coverage and capacity. So they're going to buy both. So they do want a portfolio of low and mid band. So they're definitely substitutes, and they're also complements. If you've got a ton of mid band, the low band is tremendously valuable to you, because a little bit of low band is going to expand your coverage so that you can sell all this wonderful capacity that you have. The auction handles these substitutes and complements very naturally. So this was my go round. Now, I have heard one of the carrier's technical folks say that, well, in fact, that's not quite right, because the latest 5G or 6G technologies really think about the paired and unpaired as effective substitutes, and you're getting a combination. They're also complements. It's really complicated, but they're really better thought of as a substitute for some extra mid-band paired spectrum. Is more of a substitute for mid-band unpaired spectrum than it is for low. So they're saying that there's sort of this, low band's different from high band because of its different propagation characteristics. But in terms of technology, what we're trying to do, we've got so much mid-band spectrum of both low and mid-band that they're actually both commodities for us. And we really want to substitute on the margin between unpaired and low band and unpaired and paired. And we can substitute on the margin during the auction more effectively if they're grouped. To me, that's a compelling argument. I actually like that. So I see no reason not to adopt that, because that actually makes perfect sense to me. I just didn't think of it that way initially. But, that goes to show that, if the carriers say sensible arguments, I'm all ears. I'm happy to listen to them. So actually now, as I sit here today, I think that actually we should adjust this. And the grouping should be low band spectrum, mid band spectrum, and high band spectrum. So we still have three categories, but it's low, mid, and high are the groupings. So I'm sliding the mid-band paired spectrum into the mid-band unpaired category. That might not be the best thing. I'm just saying as I sit here today. So 21, so you're saying that it's underutilized right now. So that's fine. No, it doesn't matter. I would see no reason to not include it, even though, let's say an extreme case. Maybe it's underutilized because to use it, they have to introduce some expense that they're not going to bother with. So they actually don't use it. They don't want it. So that's the worst case. So let's say it's worth zero to these guys. What happens if we include it? So then there's going to be like all this demand for 2100 and no demand for 1500 and 2300. But that wouldn't happen because we know that the demand curves, the activity rule is requiring monotonicity. The price is going to keep going up for this 2100 with each round. So it's worth zero to them, but now the price has gone up to $1 million. Now it's gone up to 10 million. Now it's gone up to 100 million. They're on the hook for it. So they're buying it for 100 million. The price of 1,500 and 2,300 is still zero. You see, it can't be an equilibrium. They get stuck. So the auction will work just fine. Yes, they can do a little bit of parking in the beginning, but they have to bid what they want to win in 1,500 and 2,300. So there might not be any excess demand or low. There will be excess demand. No, at the price of zero, there will be excess demand because these guys don't know where the price is going to be. So we're going to have excess demand in all of them. So yeah, the auction works just fine. So there's absolutely no problem with parking, even though NBTC is grossly getting the starting price for 2,100 wrong, and its value is radically different from what folks expect. The auction still works fine. So it's no problem in this case. Now you might think, well, Peter, then why is it a problem when we do them all together? Isn't the same argument apply? And to some extent it does apply, but there is some scope for parking in the simultaneous clock auction, but it's really constrained by the 100% activity requirement across the group. And because it's across the group, the worthless thing is going to get super expensive if people are parking on it. And when it's super expensive, it's super dangerous for the participants. They will get stuck buying it at prices that they're going to have to explain to their shareholders. And believe me, the explanation isn't very good. They're going to say, well, we tried to do this clever gaming strategy, which works really well for us in the SMR auction. And we now realize that Peter did explain in a whole series of papers why it wouldn't be a good idea to do this in the simultaneous clock auction when the activity rule is 100%. Well, we failed to read those papers, so we are apologizing to the board. That would be what they'd have to say. So I don't think they want to be there. It'll work. Good question. Others? No, I'm actually happy with a low, mid, and high because I view the, logically, these bands, certainly my phone, it's capable technology-wise of operating on a whole set of bands. This supports 57 different bands, I believe, something like that. And the constraints that it have are not because of technology, they're because of standards. And the standards are what's limiting what, this band is used as TDD, this band's used as FDD in these big markets. And so that's what everybody has to do because the chips have to be built or we have to make billions of these chips. And so Thailand's not a big enough market to influence the standards. So Thailand's constrained by the standards. So the standards are very important. I still believe that fundamentally, from an economics and technology point of view, there should be fungibility by propagation characteristic. And so things that are close in frequency should be close substitutes. And it's only the standards that are preventing that. And standards can change. So as they have. So I think, and now, all the cell sites now have software-defined radios. So they can adapt to anything. And they've got these fancy antennas that are software can make adjustments, a lot of adjustments. Some of it's physical, but a lot of it is software adjustable. So, it's to optimize for frequency use. So technology is just becoming more and more flexible, which means that what I say is it's the fundamental physics of frequency that is actually dictating capabilities. That's why I like to think of these ways. Now, I do respect standards. Standards are very important, and Thailand has to respect standards. The United States doesn't. The United States can do whatever it wants and say, well, we want this to be unpaired, and then and then tell the manufacturers, build it unpaired or it won't work in the U.S. And the U.S. is a big enough market. We can do that, but it's a stupid thing to do. What they should do is work the standards board to get the standards that make sense. And they don't do enough of that. But everybody should, all the countries at NBTC should have people at the standards boards, not just the carriers and the manufacturers. The regulators need to be there. Yes. Yeah, no, the same activity rule. So the activity rule is always an aggregate activity rule within the category. So it does change in that the activity rule is based upon, let's say it was a mid-band category. So all the products that are mid-band, there's an aggregate activity rule, and you have to be monotonic with respect to that aggregate activity. No, nothing changes. But you can see the problem. So you could express a infinite demand for 2100, which is worth nothing to you. And so then there's no activity rule binding. It's not a problem. But the price of 2100 is going up, and you're buying an infinite amount of it. So yeah, you don't have to submit any bids for what you want until the price goes up to a point where you don't want it. So basically, it's just 2100 then just becomes a way to extract money from stupid people bidding in the auction, because you're just going to extract this money for something that's worthless to them, and then you're going to have an auction where they're just bidding on what they want, the 1500 and the 2300. Well, what happens is none of the products in a category close until the entire category closes. So you can have zero demand for 1500, zero demand for 2300, and then the price is going to go up on 2100 until the guys start to be serious. And that's fine. So here's the problem. The problem is going to be with respect to the information that you get from the opening bids. In what I said, if it's really the case that there's this dog product, 2100, then what happens is they can play this gaming strategy where they hide the demand in the opening round from the regulator in an effort to get the regulator to lower the opening prices for 1500 and 2300, which is part of the opening. So when we come back from lunch, the main thing I'm going to talk about in the beginning is going to be the opening prices and the reserve prices and that strategy. And then I'm going to talk about TMO, and then I'm going to talk about universal service. This is a good lead into the beginning of the afternoon discussion. But the answer, this is why, if it's the case that 2100 is a dog product, you want to remove 2100 and have that be a separate category. Because there's no cost of having it be a separate category. Having it within gives the participants a way to gain the information that NBTC can glean from opening prices, from opening quantities. And so that's actually a very good reason. It actually just occurred to me because I was thinking about the standard simultaneous clock auction, which uses hard reserve prices as opposed to the soft opening prices that I'm proposing for you. So sorry about that, but you're actually right. It should be pulled. It should be a separate category. 2100. Yeah, because you said that 2100 was not worth that much. Yeah. And basically the answer is it ultimately doesn't, but what it would do is it would mess up NBTC's establishment of the reserve prices. That you would have in much more limited information at round zero. Remember, round zero is when it's just their opening demands. So notice if 2100 is worthless, they can bid whatever, a huge quantity on 2100. And if the eligibility points associated with 2100 are similar to 1500 or 2300, actually it doesn't make any difference if it's worth zero, then they're going to be able to amass tons of eligibility by their opening bid on 2100. And you might think, well, so people aren't, there's huge demand for 2100, nobody's interested in 1500 and 2300. When in fact, the truth is just the opposite. Everybody is just tricking you into thinking that they don't value 1523 megahertz so that you will reduce the reserve price for those products that they really want. This is exactly the strategy. If Pat or I were hired to advise a carrier, this is exactly what we would tell them in the opening day of the strategy session. So 2 years in advance of the auction, we would explain this strategy to them and they would do it because it's really good. That's why you want to pull 2100. If I'm understanding what you said. So, as I sit here today, and this is the big reason why having these independent products, independent simultaneous clock auctions is really useful. And in fact, why I do lots of auctions with hundreds of products where each auction is its own simultaneous clock auction. That is, I use an independent activity rule for hundreds of products. I do this lots, and it works really well. So you shouldn't be scared about having too many categories. It doesn't make any difference. I can do 1,000 categories and you don't even have 1,000 products. I can do 1,000,000 categories, actually. It really makes no difference. So what makes a difference is the gaming from the activity rule, the desire of the market participants to bid snipe, to withhold information from NBTC, to withhold information from other participants. That's what folks do in all markets. Every financial trader will tell you their strategy is intended to either mislead folks or limit the price discovery that folks can get from their bids. It's very fundamental to markets. It's the core of trading strategy. And I've learned a lot about this doing fundamental research on trading strategy in financial markets for the last 15 years, since 2008. I've been doing this. So we had a really great morning. We had lots of good questions. I was able to talk with some amount of enthusiasm about essential topics. And now we get to have lunch, converse, and I'm sure a lot of good questions are going to come up. And then we're going to talk about opening prices, reserve prices, TMO, and universal service. Thank you very much.